You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you. Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech Podcast. I have Fang Yu. She's the CTO and co-founder of a company called DataVisor. And the website is DataVisor.com, DataVisor.com. So Fang, how are you today? Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for having me, Richard. Very honored to be here.
Well, tell me about DataVisor. What's the premise of the company?
Yeah, so we do fraud detections for different sectors of the internet. So we do. So you know that the internet have a lot of attacks. Some ranging from like a social attacks like spam and phishing. Some ranging from financial fraud like better credit card applications, financial transactions, right. Like account takeovers, money launderings, etc. So in DataVisor, we actually use like a new advanced technology of unsupervised machine learning, like machine learning platforms to detect all of these different type of attacks. So is
this for individuals or for enterprise use only?
So it's mostly for enterprise. So although the end result is actually we are protecting the individual end users, so to protect their accounts by being account takeover or being spammed or being attacked. But our direct clients are enterprise, so they are usually large social clients, financial institutions, gaming companies, whoever actually have online accounts that their accounts actually could get attacked, and those are our potential clients.
So how has the threat landscape evolved, especially over the last few years? What's been changing?
Yeah, so attackers actually change quite aggressively, and they evolve a lot in the last 10 years. So if you think about 10 years ago, what kind of fraudsters are? Those are typically pocket lifting. They actually people physically steal a wallet and then use that wallet to actually either to buy some luxury goods or do some gas station, etc. Those type of small-scale attacks are still going on. But I think more and more, as more things are actually moving to online, we are seeing a huge number of attacks that actually come evolving from the digital field, and many of them are actually coming from online. So those are actually now more professional, like fraudsters. They don't actually need to go physically to do those actions because those actually don't scale, but rather they actually control these accounts or take over existing people's accounts from remotely, and then they conduct the attack from there. So they evolve a lot, and then the attack method they are using are much more advanced compared to before. For example, they can use proxies to hide their real identities, and they can even register different brand new accounts. They can receive SMS messages to actually verify themselves. And sometimes they even do a lot of obfuscation to pretend to be a good user. So you advanced machine learning solutions as well. They replay traffic, try to mimic the normal user behavior, trying to be really legitimate. So their attack vectors actually really evolved compared to before.
So how do you support regular users but not make it so difficult for them to function because of all the potential fraud and keep fraud out?
Yeah, that's actually a great point. As fraud has advanced a lot, many of the existing solutions are becoming very harsh. So if we look at what are the existing solutions nowadays, is that they use like a rules and engines or like a supervised machine learning, etc. So how do those methods work? It's based on the existing fraud that people observe, and then the fraud analysts quickly put into a rule or train a model to detect those type of fraud. But because the fraud always like evolve, the rules are because to capture new fraud, they typically need to be very harsh on like the new users or the new patterns, or there's anything suspicious, then they actually alert. As a consequence, normal users, actually the user experience got deterred quite a lot. If you look at like when we newly registered email, it actually may not allow you to send out a lot of emails. When you newly registered account, the limit may be low, the actions you could take may be quite limited, and there are multiple like SMS messages may be actually needed to actually conduct some activities. So the normal user behavior do actually got hindered quite a bit. But that unfortunately didn't stop the fraudsters. As they use advanced techniques, as I mentioned before, they are able to receive SMS messages. They are able to go over the hurdle if a service is actually limiting on how much messages they can send out. They register hundreds of, even like thousands, sometimes millions of accounts. Each one only conduct a very small amount of attack, but collectively they can still send out a lot of actually bad messages or conduct a lot of attack. So I'm seeing that a lot of actually current methods to limit the fraudsters are actually not adequate.
It seems like knowing the location of where a device is would be a good deterrent, because I've heard there's like warehouses of thousands or hundreds of thousands of devices that are used in like zombie farms to conduct actions. So, I mean, is that an important factor, is knowing the physical location, through GPS of where a phone or a laptop is that's using the access?
Yeah, that's actually a very useful technique if you really know the location of these devices. The locations can be derived from different signals. For example, IP address, where this IP is, the GPS signals, etc., the Wi-Fi signals, etc. But for fraudsters, they have ways to go over all those methods. For if we are using IP to actually locate, they're often like proxies, tunnels they set up. Sophisticated tunnels are those actually set up from data centers. They actually tunnel to data centers, and it's hard to know where their real location is. But on the other hand, data center is actually still easy to identify. This is not a consumer IP range. In some big cases that we see, they actually tunnel through those botnets, which is compromised devices like the IoT devices or machines. In those cases, then the location is really hard to identify because those are consumer IP ranges, and then many of those ranges have dynamic IPs. The IP even change, so it's hard to pinpoint. For GPS signals, it's actually a great signal to have. But many sites have trouble getting that because not all the phones allow people to actually collect, and then of course laptop won't have it. And then sophisticated attackers, we see they also simulate GPS signals, so they pretend to be somewhere where they're actually not. They use simulators, etc.
That's amazing. How could you receive an SMS to a phone that you don't own? How do they do that?
Yeah, so there are different ways of actually receiving SMS messages. Sometimes, as you already said, they actually have a form of those SIM card, and then they put it into device to remote control those. Those each one they can receive SMS messages, but they actually own those SIM cards, so they can use the same SIM card to actually attack different services. For the ones they don't own, there are different ways for them to intercept the messages as well. Sometimes it's malwares on the phone. Sometimes they actually have fake cell towers. That's actually extreme case. They will actually use those fake cell towers to intercept the messages and send messages as well. So we see those cases.
Okay, interesting. So the machine learning you're doing, I mean, what's it look like? Has it been deployed already? And are there any interesting cases where you've caught fraud? You can talk about case studies?
Sure. We are deployed over many clients now, and we're globally protecting 4 billion end user accounts. So our solution is actually used by many large clients. So there are different like machine learning solutions. What we very specialized is actually unique to DataVisor is we call it unsupervised machine learning. So unsupervised machine learning, different from supervised machine learning, it does not actually rely on the past fraud experience. In other words, our solution do not take labels. It doesn't need to know what the fraud look like. It sounds a little bit magic, but let me explain to you how it works. So as I mentioned, the fraudsters now, they actually control many different accounts remotely to actually conduct different activities. Because they are actually remote controlled or they are actually not normal users, so they have a lot of actual similarities in terms because they are remote controlled by the scripts or even manually conducted. So there are correlations among these accounts. So different from traditional solutions that only looking at a single event or single user, we are looking at all the user activities and this user's past activities, and we want to correlate to see whether this user's and this event is actually have any suspicious correlations with other people, because those correlations indicate like a big fraud ring that we want to capture. So this means we have to do a lot of computation. So this is actually not looking at a single user anymore, and we are looking at all the users. But in return, we are able to say very accurately this is actually a fraud. So in analogy, let me make an analogy to make this is actually easy to understand. So if you look at all the people actually coming to apply for a bank account in a bank branch, most people actually are different, right? Some actually wear red clothes, some wear like blue clothes, and then they actually come in different times. But if all of a sudden we see a bunch of people marching in with all the black shirt and white colors, and then they all wearing a hat, and the way they behave very similar, they all apply for they take similar actions, we know although individually each one maybe actually look very, very legitimate, but the fact there's a correlation going on, there's suspicious correlation, we can know this group is actually something wrong with it. So to extend that, even they actually apply at different branches, if globally we know there's something going on that's actually it's very suspicious, then we can actually identify that as well. So the computation of the unsupervised machine learning is a lot, because we are looking at all the users globally, but in return it can identify patterns you don't know before what the fraud. Tomorrow they may all change to white clothes or red clothes, and tomorrow they march in different way, they attack different entities. But the high levelly, we are able to identify all kind of suspicious correlations. Does that make sense to you?
Well, yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. But what happens if the attackers are not in the country or in the jurisdiction in which the fraud happens? I mean, what can you do to them besides try to block them? Can you pursue them, or does your involvement end there, just detection?
So for DataVisor, as the first step, we are more actually involved in just detecting them, because sometimes it's very hard to pinpoint exactly who the fraudster is, especially they use like proxies, etc., to hide their real identity. But we hope that we can detect things early. So if we detect things after the fact, for example, when the bad messages are sent, the credit card transaction already goes through, then there is not much value. So what we actually try to emphasize is we want to detect things early. When the account is registered, we want to actually detect it right away at the registration time to prevent this account to have actually further damage down the road to any bad actions. So by detecting them early, then we can stop the damages for our clients.
And how sophisticated are hackers and fraudsters today? I mean, like you said, sometimes you'll see a whole group of them doing something, but if it's a one-off attack, how sophisticated have you seen it? Have you seen it where it's so sophisticated that it's pretty much undetectable unless it happens repeatedly or from a large group?
Yeah. So, of course, the larger the group, the easier and the more obvious it becomes. And we do see actually fraudsters become very sophisticated and very stealthy. For example, they can actually register accounts and then just hibernate, and they don't do anything. So they age their account to actually let it be look normal. The amount of age we see is sometimes like a few days, sometimes like a few weeks or months. And in the extreme case, we see the age of like 3 years. So they actually do become very, very patient in actually to have their real to hide their real identities and to make their fake identities look real. And they also do those one-off attacks, as you mentioned, to actually get very, very sophisticated. For those one-off attacks, we have supervised machine learning and also rule engine, those traditional methods to actually detect them. But typically, those fraudsters, when they actually do one-off after they got succeeded, or they will actually want to repeat the process to actually conduct more. So the real value is actually when you detect things, you detect at very early on before they actually want to bust out like a large attack. We want to know, what is actually the patterns, and detect them very early on when they actually started doing things.
It seems like it'd be a lot better to detect, fraud early on. But
right.
The earlier on you try to detect it, the less data you have on the fraud, the less people involved, because they probably test the waters before they do anything. So it seems like a difficult trade-off,
Exactly. So we see a lot of actually testing going on, and then sometimes the testing is actually pretty small with one or a few accounts. They typically actually want to test their script whether it works, so it's not a single one. But at the testing phase, we already know this. Even it's only a few. So the ring that I mentioned before, it doesn't have actually when they actually go to thousands or even tens of thousands we captured. The ring that we capturing in terms of repeatability actually varies sector from sector. So in the financial sector, the rings actually are very small because many of the attacks are actually can be manually conducted. So it varies from 2 to like hundreds of accounts. Sometimes it goes to thousands as well, but it's less. So the norm is around like five accounts when the rings especially forming. And in the social sector, the rings are actually much bigger because each account will not actually put them much gain at all doing one account bad actions. So in that sense, the ring that we see is on the hundreds or even over. And then when they started testing, it's about like a 5 to 10 as well.
All right. In terms of the machine learning, if this is working and it's helping to stop fraud, do you anticipate that there'll still be these huge breaches where 50 million credit cards will be stolen or things like that will happen, or is it just that the companies that's happening to don't have the technology and the machine learning to fight against it?
Yeah. So that the breaches part, I think it's unfortunately it's actually continuing to happening, and then the breach part and the anti-fraud are related because those breaches later are actually cause fraud issues. But the breaches, I think that we need to actually solution and things on both ends. The first actually to stop the breachings and stop those information be actually leaked. And the second part is actually the detection part. If there are actually breaches of data, how do we actually detect those attacks actually result from those breaches? Because sometimes for especially for enterprise, it's both ends. You want to protect your database. Sometimes it's hard to prevent even like others, for example, a credit database being breached. Then someone else's database got breached, may be actually used to attack these services as well. So as a whole industry, I think we need to have both sides protected. Everybody should protect their own database. Meanwhile, everybody should actually look at the incoming traffic to their own services and identify fraud resulting from those breaches.
Yeah, but is this possible without machine learning? Is it possible to do it manually with personnel that are monitoring the network, or has it gotten so sophisticated that it's impossible without it?
I think both solutions are needed. I think the personnel actually like restrictions, the access control, the firewalls, definitely a must. I think to actually stop all those breaches, and then advanced machine learning solutions are also needed to stop. I think it's adding whatever we have to actually, it's like putting prevent fires, right? You have different solutions, but and then we should try all the means we have to stop the breaches and prevent the breaches from actually happening.
So what's next over the next 6 months or a year? What are you working on that's new, that's coming out that you can talk about?
Yeah, so for us, we are actually building different products. So we are doing like unsupervised machine learning to actually identify the fraud. So we are also more integrating with the supervised machine learning, and we are also generating automated rules for clients to actually import into the rule system. So we are broadening up our a platform to actually get more of the whole solutions for the client. In the meanwhile, we are also developing the unsupervised enterprise version, which will allow the client to actually tune the models themselves, to adjust the things themselves, so to give clients more handles on how to actually leverage unsupervised machine learning to detect fraud. So that's actually going to coming out in the next year.
Have you seen any evidence of fraudsters or hackers using their own machine learning to counteract what you're doing?
We see fraudsters actually having a lot of advanced tech solutions as well, as you mentioned. So they keep innovating, use the latest technology as well to replay traffic to hide their real identity. But I think currently, what we as a company, we are innovating as well. We have a bigger a footprint, and then also network events that we are having the global intelligence network, and we are using the latest technology. So we keep evolving. I think the part nice about supervised machine learning that we have is not too much of the cat and mouse game, because existing solutions like rules and supervised machine learning, it's very reactive to what the attackers currently doing, and then so that's always a cat and mouse game. So for unsupervised machine learning that we are building, because it doesn't have existing assumption on what the fraud look like, that itself is actually more robust in terms of the detection. So even the attack evolve which they do evolve every day and every hour. Our solution so far, it looks very good actually capturing even the new attacks.
Okay, very good. And what's the best way for people to get in touch or to ask more questions?
Yeah, so they can always go to DataVisor.com, DataVisor.com. They can actually request a demo there, and request POCs from there and test from there as well. And they can also email us at info.datavisor.com for more information.
Yeah, actually, one question I forgot to ask you is, do you have a division that kind of, scours the dark web or forums and finds out what the latest and greatest hacking techniques are? Is that a source of gathering intelligence for you, or do you rely more on the machine learning to just, not be influenced by what you see and just see what it sees?
So we don't have we have a research department which we actually look at all the threats. So that's actually looking at all the attack. We identified all the sophisticated ones, all the clients reported to us. So it's not too much into looking at the dark web per se, but we do investigations. And moreover, that we also do investigation on the statistical, because we have many clients, and globally we are protecting 4 billion user accounts. So we have a threat report every quarter published, actually to analyze what's actually latest trend of the fraud look like, what's actually the most dominating the attack techniques that actually attacking different sectors, what are the common methods, and what are the different methods. So that actually we actually publish, and I hope that one can actually help the whole community to gather more information of the latest attack trend, and let's fight the fraud together.
Okay, very good. Well, Fang, I appreciate you coming on the podcast, and thank you.
Thank you so much. It was very nice talking to you, and thanks for the opportunity.
You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you.